This video thoroughly covers everything in Unit 5 of AP Human Geography in just 51 minutes. It's part of my full 5-hour course review, which you can also find on this channel. You'll occasionally see mentions of the 5-hour study guide and FRQ Mastery Playbook. Both are designed to be completed while watching these videos, and they're linked in the description if you want to get exam ready in just 5 hours. Otherwise, enjoy the video. Unit 5 in AP Human Geography is titled Agriculture and Rural Land Use Patterns and Processes. The unit contains 12 lessons. Let's dive right in with Lesson 1, titled Introduction to Agriculture. Agriculture is the process of growing crops and raising animals for food, fuel, and other products. In this lesson, we'll explore two key influences on agricultural practices: the physical environment and the climate of a region. Then, we'll look at two types of farming that you'll need to know to successfully navigate this unit: intensive farming and extensive farming. Let's explore the influences on farming practices first. Agriculture is deeply affected by the physical features of the land and the climate conditions in a region. Physical features such as soil type, elevation, slope, and access to water determine what can be grown and how easily it can be harvested. For example, flat land with fertile soil and good drainage is ideal for growing grains or vegetables, while steep or rocky land may be used for grazing animals instead. The second influence is climate. The AP Human Geography curriculum names two specific climate zones as examples to show how different climates affect agriculture, so let's look at them. First is the Mediterranean climate. A Mediterranean climate has hot, dry summers and mild, wet winters. This is found in parts of southern Europe and California. This climate is perfect for growing grapes, olives, and citrus fruits. The second example in the curriculum is tropical climates. This climate is warm and humid year-round. It is found near the equator in regions like Southeast Asia and northern South America. This allows for the growth of crops like rice, bananas, and sugarcane. Next, we'll look at two types of farming practices: intensive and extensive. Don't overlook this part because these terms are going to come up again when we look at theories and models of farming later in this unit. Write these terms down and commit them to memory. Intensive farming practices use small areas of land but require a lot of labor or capital to produce high yields. These methods are often found near cities or in areas with high population density. AP Human Geography requires that you know about three main types of intensive farming: market gardening, plantation agriculture, and mixed crop and livestock systems. The first type is market gardening, also called commercial gardening. This involves growing fruits, vegetables, and flowers for sale in local or regional markets. It usually takes place on small plots of land close to urban areas, and farmers often use greenhouses, irrigation systems, and fertilizers to increase production. Strawberries, lettuce, and tomatoes are common crops in market gardening. The second type is plantation agriculture. This is a large-scale operation that focuses on growing a single cash crop, such as sugarcane, coffee, or tea, for export. While the land area is large, the farming style is still intensive because it involves heavy investment in labor and infrastructure. Plantation agriculture is common in tropical regions, especially in former colonies where this type of farming was historically introduced. The third type is mixed crop and livestock systems. In this system, farmers grow crops and raise animals on the same land. The crops may be used to feed the animals, and animal waste can be used to fertilize the soil. This creates a cycle that makes efficient use of space and resources. This method is common in parts of the Midwestern United States and Central Europe. Now let's look at extensive farming practices. These involve using large areas of land with lower inputs of labor or money per unit of land. These systems are often found in areas where the land is cheaper or less productive. In this section, we'll examine three types of extensive farming: shifting cultivation, nomadic herding, and ranching. The first type is shifting cultivation. Farmers clear a small patch of land, burn the vegetation, and plant crops for a few years. When the soil becomes less fertile, they move to a new area and start again. After the abandoned land has had time to recover, farmers may return to it in future years, burn the vegetation, and replant their crops. This creates a cyclical farming pattern on the land. This cycle allows the land to recover, but it requires a lot of space and can contribute to deforestation. The second type is nomadic herding, which involves moving animals from place to place in search of grazing land. Herders often move according to seasonal patterns. This practice is common in dry regions like North Africa, Central Asia, and the Middle East, where farming crops is difficult due to limited water. The third type is ranching, which involves raising large herds of animals, usually cattle or sheep, over vast open areas. Ranching is common in places like the western United States, Argentina, and Australia. It requires fewer workers per acre but needs a lot of land and is often done in drier climates where crops don't grow well. Okay, that's it for this lesson. If you're following along with the study guide, check your answers for this section using the answer key before moving on. For this lesson's free response question set, I've put together an exam-style question focused on intensive and extensive farming, because, as I said earlier, these terms are particularly important for you to remember in this unit. And when you're ready, we'll move on to topic 5.2. In this lesson, we will explore how rural and agricultural land is organized and divided. First, we'll study types of rural settlement patterns. Second, we'll explore the different survey methods used to divide rural land. In this section, we will look at three main types of rural settlement patterns: clustered, dispersed, and linear. The first type is the clustered settlement pattern. In a clustered settlement, homes and buildings are grouped closely together in a small area, often near a central point like a church or crossroads. The surrounding farmland is located just outside the village or settlement. This pattern is common in parts of Europe and Asia, where farmers work together and rely on shared infrastructure. Clustered settlements promote social interaction and community life. The second type is the dispersed settlement pattern. In this arrangement, houses and farms are spread out across the countryside, with each home located on a separate parcel of land. This pattern is typical in North America, especially in areas where land is plentiful and farming is done individually. Dispersed settlements are more private and require transportation to access markets and services. The third type is the linear settlement pattern. This pattern occurs when homes and buildings are arranged in a straight line, often following a road, river, or canal. This allows each property to have easy access to transportation or water. Now let's look at how rural land is surveyed and divided. In this section, we will explore three survey methods: meets and bounds, township and range, and long lot. The first method is meets and bounds. This is one of the oldest ways of dividing land, based on natural landmarks and irregular shapes. Meets are straight-line measurements, and bounds refer to physical features like rivers, trees, or rocks. This system was commonly used in England and the original 13 American colonies. Because it depends on natural features, the shapes of the plots are often irregular. The second method is township and range. This system was developed in the United States after the country expanded westward. Land was divided into a grid using latitude and longitude lines, with each township being a square unit of land that is 6 miles by 6 miles. Each township was further divided into 36 sections. This method created uniform, rectangular plots of land and is still visible today in parts of the Midwest and West. The third method is the long lot system. This method was used by the French and is found in former French colonies like Quebec and Louisiana. Land was divided into long, narrow plots that stretched back from rivers or roads. Each farmer had a thin strip that included access to water or transportation. This system created linear settlement patterns and allowed more people to access vital resources. Okay, that's it for topic 5.2. If you're following along with the study guide, check your answers for this section using the answer key before moving on. And when you're ready, we'll move on to topic 5.3. In this lesson, we will study how agriculture began and how it spread across the world. First, we will look at 4 early hearths of domestication. Then we will examine 4 distinct diffusion patterns: the Columbian Exchange, the First Agricultural Revolution, the Second Agricultural Revolution, and the Third Agricultural Revolution. Let's start with the hearths of domestication, which are the first places where people began growing crops and raising animals. In this section, we will explore 4 agricultural hearths: the Fertile Crescent, the Indus River Valley, Southeast Asia, and Central America. The first hearth is the Fertile Crescent, located in the Middle East around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It is considered one of the earliest and most influential agricultural regions. Farmers in this area domesticated wheat, barley, lentils, and animals such as sheep and goats. Because of its location and resources, the Fertile Crescent became a hub of agricultural innovation and trade. The second hearth is the Indus River Valley, in present-day Pakistan and northwest India. Here, early farmers cultivated wheat, barley, and cotton, and raised animals such as cattle and water buffalo. The predictable flooding of the Indus River supported stable food production, which helped early cities and civilizations to grow. The third hearth is Southeast Asia, where crops like rice, taro, bananas, and sugarcane were first domesticated. This region also saw the early domestication of animals like pigs and chickens. The warm, humid climate allowed for multiple harvests each year, making agriculture productive and sustainable. The fourth hearth is Central America, where indigenous peoples domesticated crops such as maize, corn, beans, squash, and chili peppers. These crops supported the development of advanced civilizations like the Maya and Aztecs and later spread throughout the Americas and beyond. Okay, the second half of this lesson is about agricultural diffusion, which refers to the spread of agriculture from hearths to other regions. In this section, we will study 4 major patterns of agricultural diffusion: the Columbian Exchange, the First Agricultural Revolution, the Second Agricultural Revolution, and the Third Agricultural Revolution. The first pattern is the Columbian Exchange. This was the global transfer of plants, animals, and diseases that occurred after Europeans began exploring and colonizing the Americas in the late 1400s. American crops like maize, potatoes, and tomatoes were introduced to Europe, Africa, and Asia, while wheat, rice, sugarcane, horses, and cattle were brought to the Americas. The Columbian Exchange reshaped global diets and farming systems, permanently connecting the Old World and the New World. The second pattern is the First Agricultural Revolution, which began around 10,000 years ago. It marked the transition from hunting and gathering to settled farming. This revolution happened independently in multiple hearths. As early farmers moved or traded with others, they spread new crops and domesticated animals to new regions. For example, wheat spread from the Fertile Crescent into Europe, and rice spread from Southeast Asia to China and Japan. This revolution laid the foundation for the first permanent settlements and civilizations. The third pattern is the Second Agricultural Revolution, which began in Europe between the 17th and 19th centuries. It involved major changes to farming practices due to the use of new tools, improved crop rotation, and better transportation. The invention of the steel plow, mechanical reaper, and improvements in drainage and fertilization helped increase productivity. These innovations spread throughout Europe and into the Americas, making food production more efficient and supporting rapid population growth during the Industrial Revolution. The fourth pattern is the Third Agricultural Revolution, also known as the Green Revolution. It began in the mid-20th century and involved the global spread of high-yield crops, chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and mechanized farming. The Green Revolution had a major impact on countries in Asia and Latin America, where new varieties of wheat and rice helped increase food supply. However, it also raised concerns about environmental damage and unequal access to resources. Okay, that brings us to the end of topic 5.3. If you're following along with the study guide, check your answers for this section using the answer key before moving on. And when you're ready, we'll move on to topic 5.4. In topic 5.3, we briefly introduce the Second Agricultural Revolution as part of agriculture's global diffusion. In this lesson, we are going to go deeper into what made the Second Agricultural Revolution so transformative. The Second Agricultural Revolution happened in Europe during the 17th through 19th centuries, and it introduced technological and structural changes that made farming much more productive. This revolution is defined by 3 important aspects: new tools and equipment, changes to farming systems, and the overall impact on food production. The first aspect is the development of new tools and equipment. Inventions like the steel plow, mechanical seed drill, and horse-drawn cultivator allowed farmers to work land more efficiently and plant crops more evenly. These tools reduced the need for manual labor and increased yields, which meant farmers could grow more food with fewer workers. The second aspect is the introduction of new farming systems, especially in Britain. One major change was the enclosure movement, where small farms were consolidated into larger, fenced-in plots, often against the will of the smaller farmers. This made farming more efficient but also forced many small farmers off the land. Another key development was improved crop rotation, such as the four-field system. In this system, farmers seasonally rotated crops around 4 fields. They selected crops that would regenerate the fields from the previous crop. This helped keep soil fertile year-round, reduced the need to leave land fallow, meaning unused, and ensured it was always in use. The third aspect is the increase in food production. Together, these innovations led to higher agricultural output. With more reliable food sources, populations grew, and fewer people were needed to work the land. Now let's look at the consequences of the second agricultural revolution. We'll focus on 3 specific consequences: improved diets, longer life expectancies, and the movement of people from farms to cities. The first consequence was improved diets. With more crops and better livestock, people had more access to fresh food. The variety and amount of food increased, helping people get the nutrients they needed. This improved public health, especially in urban areas that had previously suffered from food shortages. The second consequence was longer life expectancies. With fewer famines and more stable food supplies, people lived longer. This helped fuel a population boom in Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries, which created a growing workforce for new industries. The third consequence was a labor shift from farms to factories. Because fewer people were needed on farms, many rural workers moved to cities in search of jobs. This migration supported the Industrial Revolution, which depended on large numbers of urban workers. In this way, the second agricultural revolution helped create the conditions for modern industrial economies. Okay, that brings us to the end of topic 5.4. If you're following along with the study guide, check your answers for this section using the answer key before moving on. And when you're ready, we'll move on to topic 5.5. In the previous lesson, we talked about the second agricultural revolution. In this lesson, we progress to the third agricultural revolution, which is better known as the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution began in the mid-20th century, especially in the 1950s and 1960s, and focused on boosting crop production in developing countries. For this lesson, we'll look at 3 key features of the Green Revolution. Then, we'll examine its consequences, both the benefits and drawbacks. The 3 key features of this revolution that you are required to know about for AP Human Geography are high-yield seeds, chemical inputs, and mechanized farming and irrigation. The first feature was the use of high-yield seeds. Scientists developed new varieties of wheat, rice, and corn that produced much more food per plant. These seeds were often bred to resist disease and pests. One famous example is IR-8 rice, which dramatically increased rice yields in Asia. The second feature was the increased use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Fertilizers helped crops grow faster and stronger, while pesticides protected them from insects and disease. These chemicals made farming more reliable but also introduced toxins into the soil and water. The third feature was the spread of mechanized farming and advanced irrigation systems. Tractors, harvesters, and other machines allowed large fields to be farmed quickly, and irrigation helped bring water to dry areas. These innovations were especially important in countries like India and Mexico, where farming had previously relied on manual labor. The AP Human Geography curriculum also requires that you know the positive and negative consequences of the Green Revolution. In this section, we will examine 3 areas of impact: positive effects on food supply, negative environmental effects, and unequal access to the benefits. The first impact was positive effects on food security and population growth. In countries like India and the Philippines, the Green Revolution helped prevent famines and support growing populations. Farmers could grow more food on the same amount of land, feeding more people and reducing hunger. The second impact was negative environmental consequences. The heavy use of fertilizers and pesticides caused soil degradation, water pollution, and loss of biodiversity. In addition, irrigation systems often led to water shortages or salinization of soil, especially in arid regions. The third impact was social and economic inequality. Wealthier farmers were able to afford the new seeds, chemicals, and machines, while poorer farmers often could not. This widened the gap between rich and poor in rural areas. In some places, it even led to land consolidation, where small farms were bought out by larger ones. Okay, that brings us to the end of topic 5.5. If you're following along with the study guide, check your answers for this section using the answer key before moving on. And when you're ready, we'll move on to topic 5.6. In this lesson, we will study how agricultural regions are organized. This is a deeper look at farming strategy. Not just what is grown, but why it is grown in certain ways in certain regions. First, we'll look at two farming practices, subsistence farming and commercial farming, and explore how they emerge. Then we'll study bid-rent theory, which explains how land costs and distance from the market help determine the farming methods in different regions. Let's start with the differences in farming practices. In this section, we'll explore subsistence farming versus commercial farming. The first distinction is subsistence farming. This type of farming is mostly found in developing countries, especially in rural or isolated areas. Farmers grow just enough food to feed themselves and their families, often using simple tools and family labor. They tend to plant a variety of crops for local use and rely heavily on seasonal conditions. There is little surplus for sale and very little mechanization. The second distinction is commercial farming, where crops and livestock are grown to be sold in markets for profit. This is more common in developed countries or in regions with strong connections to urban markets. Commercial farms often use machines, fertilizers, and specialized labor. They focus on efficiency and scale, aiming to produce as much as possible for distribution to cities and even international buyers. Commercial farming has increasingly engaged in the practices of monocropping and monoculture. Monocropping means growing the same crop on the same land year after year, like corn or soybeans in the U.S. Midwest. Monoculture means producing a single crop across a wide area. The two methods are often used side by side to make farming easier to manage, especially with machinery. However, they also increase the risk of crop failure and reduce biodiversity. Okay, so that's the first half of the lesson. So far, we've learned that subsistence farming occurs in remote and poor areas of the world, while commercial farming occurs in more connected and developed regions. For the second half of this lesson, we need to turn to bid-rent theory, which provides another framework for understanding how location influences farming. Specifically, bid-rent theory explains how the cost of land affects farming practices. Land closer to the city is more expensive, and land farther away is cheaper. Because of this, farmers near cities tend to farm in different ways to farmers in rural and remote areas. To further explain this phenomenon, bid-rent theory uses two terms we first came across in lesson 5.1, intensive farming and extensive farming. To recap, intensive farming is a way of growing crops or raising animals that uses a lot of labor, chemicals, or machinery on a small piece of land to get the highest yield possible. For example, growing vegetables in greenhouses with fertilizers and pesticides, or raising chickens in large indoor barns, are both forms of intensive farming. Extensive farming uses large areas of land with fewer inputs, meaning it depends more on natural resources and less on chemicals or machines. For example, cattle ranching in Australia or wheat farming on wide-open prairies in Canada are both examples of extensive farming. According to bid-rent theory, intensive farming occurs near cities where land is expensive because it allows them to maximize output on small but expensive plots of land. By contrast, extensive farming occurs far from cities where land is cheap. Because the land is more affordable, farmers can spread crops or animals over large areas. Okay, that brings us to the end of topic 5.6. If you're following along with the study guide, check your answers for this section, using the answer key before moving on. And when you're ready, we'll move on to topic 5.7. In this lesson, we explore how modern agriculture has changed in response to new technology, global markets, and rising food demand. Farming today looks very different from how it did in the past. We'll start by looking at this shift in farm consolidation and why it's happening. Next, we'll explore how food moves from farms to tables through commodity chains that link different parts of the world. Finally, we'll examine how agricultural technology has increased both the scale and efficiency of food production, allowing more food to be grown on the same land. Let's start with farm consolidation, which refers to the process of large-scale commercial farms replacing small family farms. This is because big agricultural companies can afford expensive machinery, buy seeds and fertilizers in bulk, and use large areas of land to lower their costs. Small family farms often can't compete with these advantages, so many have shut down or been bought out. This shift is changing the landscape of farming and who controls food production. The next big shift is the emergence of commodity chains. A commodity chain in agriculture is the step-by-step process by which a farm product is grown, processed, transported, sold, and consumed. Commodity chains emerged because globalization facilitated more trade, and at the same time, cities needed to find a way to reliably source food in order to feed growing urban populations. Our third big change has been the advancement in agricultural technologies. New machines, irrigation systems, fertilizers, and scientific methods have allowed farmers to grow more food using less labor. This leads to economies of scale where producing more actually costs less per unit. It has also increased the carrying capacity of the land, meaning the same piece of land can support more crops or animals than before. These changes are driven by the need to boost food production, especially in a world with limited farmland. Okay, that's it for topic 5.7. If you're following along with the study guide, check your answers for this section using the answer key before moving on. And when you're ready, we'll move on to topic 5.8. In this lesson, we will learn about the von Thunen model, one of the most important models in agricultural geography. The model was created in the early 19th century to explain how farmers decide where to locate different types of agriculture based on distance from the market. This may sound like the bid-rent theory, which we discussed in topic 5.6. However, while the bid-rent theory explained how land cost affects farming decisions, the von Thunen model looks at how transportation costs shape rural land use. First, we'll explain how von Thunen's model works. Then, we'll look at exceptions to the model. Von Thunen's model is a theory that helps explain how farmers use land around a central market, like a big town or city. The idea is that transportation costs affect what gets grown where. The model is often represented as concentric rings. The very center is the market, which is the city or town where farmers bring their products to sell. Surrounding the market is the first ring, which has dairy farming and other intensive farming, because milk, cheese, and fresh vegetables spoil quickly and must be delivered to the city fast. The next ring is forestry, since wood is heavy and expensive to move long distances, so it needs to be cut close to the market. Just a quick note here. This model was produced when wood was needed for fuel in cities, and oxen were used to carry the wood to market. Today, with better transport and different purposes for wood, it is unlikely to find forestry so close to a city. Okay, let's look at the next ring. In this ring, we have the grain fields and other crops that do not spoil quickly and are lighter to transport, so they can be grown farther away. Even further out are ranches where cattle and sheep are raised because they need lots of land, and the animals can walk to the market themselves. Outside of these rings is wilderness, which is too far away to farm profitably and is usually left as forest or used for hunting. Although von Thunen's model is useful, it doesn't always match real-world farming. Let's look at 3 reasons why regions may not follow the model: modern transportation, natural and human differences in geography, and the unique case of specialty farming. The first reason is modern transportation. Trains, highways, refrigerated trucks, and airplanes have greatly reduced the cost of moving goods over long distances. Because of this, farmers don't need to be as close to the city as they once did, even when producing perishable crops. For example, strawberries grown in California can be shipped across the country and still arrive fresh. The second reason is geographic variation. In reality, land is not uniform. Mountains, rivers, climate zones, and government policies all influence what kind of farming is done and where. Soil quality also varies from place to place. These factors mean that real-world land use often doesn't follow neat concentric rings. The third reason is specialty farming. Some regions focus on specific high-value crops like wine grapes, avocados, or coffee. These products are often grown far from major markets but can still be profitable because they're unique or in high demand. For example, vineyards in France or California exist in specific climates, not based on distance from a city, and sell their products globally, not just locally. Okay, that brings us to the end of topic 5.8. If you're following along with the study guide, check your answers for this section, using the answer key before moving on. The free response practice questions for this lesson: use a graph based on the Thunen Model to test your ability to apply this knowledge in an exam-like situation. And when you're ready, we'll move on to topic 5.9. In this lesson, we will study how agriculture functions at a global scale. First, we'll look at how agriculture operates within a global supply chain. Then, we'll explore what happens when countries become dependent on agricultural exports. Finally, we'll examine how food is distributed across the globe and how that distribution is influenced by politics, infrastructure, and trade patterns. First, let's look at how food and agricultural products are part of a global supply chain. This means that food often travels a long way from where it's grown to where it's eaten. For example, rice might be grown in Thailand, packed in a factory in another country, and then shipped across the ocean to be sold in a grocery store in the United States. Each step is part of the supply chain. This system connects people all over the world: farmers, truck drivers, factory workers, grocery stores, and you, the customer. Without the global supply chain, most people wouldn't have access to so many different kinds of food. Next, let's move on to what happens when countries depend on one or two agricultural exports. This means we're now looking at countries that rely heavily on selling certain crops to other places. Some countries grow mostly one crop, like coffee, cocoa, or cotton, because that crop earns them a lot of money in global trade. But this can be dangerous. If something goes wrong, like the weather ruining a harvest or the global price dropping, the country could lose a big part of its income. When a country depends too much on just one export, its economy becomes fragile. It's like putting all your eggs in one basket. If the basket drops, you lose everything. Now, let's move on to the final part of the lesson: how the distribution of food around the world is affected by political relationships, infrastructure, and world trade patterns. These three factors help explain why some countries have more food available than others, and why food sometimes takes a long time to get where it needs to go. The first factor is political relationships. Countries that are friendly with each other are more likely to trade food and help one another. But if two countries are in conflict or have placed trade restrictions on each other, that can stop the flow of food. The second factor is infrastructure. This means the physical systems that help move food, like roads, railways, ports, and storage buildings. Countries with strong infrastructure can move food quickly and keep it fresh. Without good infrastructure, it's harder to get food from farms to cities or to export it to other countries. The third factor is patterns of world trade. This refers to the direction and flow of food. In general, food flows from surplus regions to deficit regions. For example, the United States has the ideal climate for wheat and corn, so we have a surplus of these goods, while Colombia has the ideal climate for coffee and bananas, so they have a surplus of these goods. So coffee and bananas may flow north, while corn may flow south. To sum up, we've looked at three big ideas: how agriculture fits into a global supply chain, what happens when countries depend on export crops, and how food is distributed around the world. Each of these parts shows how agriculture today is truly a global system. Okay, that brings us to the end of topic 5.9. If you're following along with the study guide, check your answers for this section using the answer key before moving on. And when you're ready, we'll move on to topic 5.10. In this lesson, we will examine the consequences of agricultural practices. First, we'll look at the environmental impacts of land use. Then, we'll study how specific agricultural practices physically alter the landscape. Finally, we'll explore how agriculture changes human life. Let's start with environmental impacts. In this section, we'll explore four key factors: pollution, land cover change, desertification and salinization, and efforts toward conservation. The first environmental effect is pollution. Agricultural runoff often contains fertilizers, pesticides, and animal waste, which can contaminate rivers, lakes, and groundwater. These chemicals can lead to algal blooms, harm aquatic life, and reduce water quality. The second effect is land cover change, especially through deforestation. As forests are cleared for farmland, especially in tropical regions, biodiversity is lost, and the land's ability to absorb carbon decreases. This contributes to climate change and habitat destruction. The third effect is desertification and soil salinization. Desertification happens when overfarming, overgrazing, or poor irrigation dries out the soil, turning it into unusable land. Soil salinization occurs when too much irrigation water evaporates and leaves behind salt, damaging the soil's fertility. These problems are especially common in dry regions where water is limited. The fourth effect is conservation efforts. In response to the damage caused by agriculture, some farmers adopt sustainable practices like crop rotation, reduced chemical use, or organic farming. Governments and environmental groups also work to protect land through reforestation, wetland restoration, and soil preservation programs. Okay, now let's pivot to the direct effects of agricultural activities on the landscape. In this section, we'll explore the following types of landscape modification: slash and burn, terraces, irrigation, deforestation, draining wetlands, shifting cultivation, and pastoral nomadism. First, slash and burn is a method where farmers cut down vegetation and burn it to clear land for farming. The ashes add nutrients to the soil, making it good for planting, at least for a short time. This changes the landscape by removing forests and creating open fields. Next is terracing, which means carving flat steps into hillsides to grow crops. This is often used in mountainous areas where flat land is hard to find. It changes the natural shape of the land and helps stop soil from washing away. Irrigation is another major practice. It involves bringing water to crops using canals, pipes, or sprinklers. While this helps grow food in dry areas, it also alters the land by changing how water flows and where it collects. Now let's look at deforestation, which is the clearing of forests to make room for farms or grazing land. This has a big impact because it removes trees, changes habitats, and can lead to soil erosion and climate changes in the area. Draining wetlands is when water is removed from marshy areas to turn them into farmland. This makes the land drier and usable for crops, but it also destroys important ecosystems and affects the water cycle. Shifting cultivation, which we briefly discussed in Lesson 5.1, is when farmers grow crops in one place for a few years, then move to a new area and let the old land recover. It's often paired with slash and burn practices because when the farmers move to a new area, they often need to clear the land of its existing vegetation. This pattern creates patches of farmland and fallow land, which changes the natural growth and appearance of the region. Finally, pastoral nomadism involves moving herds of animals from place to place in search of fresh grazing land. This movement affects large areas of land over time, as animals graze and wear down vegetation in each location. Now let's pivot to the societal effects of agriculture. Because in addition to shaping the environment, agriculture also influences how people live. In this section, we'll explore three important societal effects: changing diets, the role of women in agriculture, and the economic purpose of farming. The first effect is changing diets. As countries develop, people often shift from plant-based diets to those that include more meat, dairy, and processed foods. This can lead to rising demand for certain crops and animal products, changing the way land is used and which industries grow. The second effect is the changing role of women in agricultural production. In many parts of the world, women are essential to food production, especially in subsistence farming. However, they often lack access to land ownership, credit, and training. As societies modernize, women are playing a more visible and formal role in agricultural decision-making and production. We'll go much deeper into the role of women in agriculture in Lesson 5.12. The third effect is that agriculture drives economic development. In rural areas, farming provides jobs and supports local economies. As farms become connected to national and global supply chains, communities can build wealth. Okay, that's it for topic 5.10. If you're following along with the study guide, check your answers for this section using the answer key before moving on. And when you're ready, we'll move on to topic 5.11. In the previous lesson, we started to explore some of the negative consequences of agricultural practices. In this lesson, we're going to continue this journey, but we'll be a little more forward-looking by exploring some of the challenges we face when thinking about feeding the world in the 21st century and how these problems might be solved. As always, we'll stick closely to the requirements set out in the AP Human Geography curriculum, so you learn everything you need to know for the exam. So, let's get started. For this lesson, there are 4 main ideas to learn. First, we'll talk about agricultural innovations and how they affect the environment and the way we grow food. Then, we'll move on to food choice movements. These are trends that affect how and why people choose certain foods. Third, we'll look at the challenges of feeding a growing global population. And fourth, we'll explore the economic effects of food production practices. Let's start with agricultural innovations and their impacts. We'll begin by looking at 3 major innovations: biotechnology, genetically modified organisms, and aquaculture. Then we'll talk about 4 major debates connected to these innovations. First is biotechnology. Biotechnology is when science is used to improve plants and animals for farming. For example, scientists might develop seeds that grow faster or resist disease. This helps farmers grow more food and reduce losses, but it also raises questions about long-term effects on nature and whether small farmers can afford the technology. Next is genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. These are crops that have had their genes changed in a lab to do things like survive cold weather or resist insects. This can make food cheaper and more available. But many people worry about health risks, environmental damage, and companies controlling seeds. Then we have aquaculture, which means farming fish, shellfish, and other water animals. Instead of catching fish in the wild, farmers raise them in tanks or coastal pens. This helps protect wild fish populations and provides more food. Still, if not managed well, fish farms can pollute water and spread disease to natural ecosystems. Now let's look at the 4 debates that come with these innovations: sustainability, soil and water usage, biodiversity loss, and chemical use. First is sustainability. People ask, can these farming methods keep working long-term without damaging the environment? Some innovations improve food supply now, but they may use up resources or create pollution that makes farming harder in the future. Second is soil and water usage. Some modern farming methods require lots of water for irrigation or chemicals that damage the soil. Over time, this can lead to dry land, polluted water, or soil that can no longer grow crops. Third is biodiversity. When farms grow just one type of plant or raise one type of animal, it reduces the variety of life in the area. Less biodiversity makes ecosystems weaker and more likely to break down when problems happen, like disease or weather changes. Fourth is chemical use. Modern farming often uses lots of fertilizers and pesticides. These help crops grow and stop pests, but they can also pollute rivers, harm wildlife, and even affect human health when they get into food or drinking water. Now let's move to our second big idea: food choice movements. These are trends that affect how people produce and eat food. We'll explore 7 of them: urban farming, community-supported agriculture, organic farming, value-added specialty crops, fair trade, local food movements, and dietary shifts. First is urban farming. This is when people grow food in cities using rooftops, backyards, or even abandoned lots. It helps provide fresh produce to people living in food deserts and reduces the need to transport food long distances. It also gives people more control over what they eat. Next is community-supported agriculture, or CSA. In a CSA, people pay local farmers at the start of the season and receive regular boxes of fresh produce. This helps farmers earn steady income and gives communities healthy, seasonal food grown nearby. Organic farming is another important movement. Organic farmers avoid using synthetic chemicals and focus on using natural compost and pest control. This protects the soil and water, and some people prefer organic food because they believe it's healthier or better for the planet. Then we have value-added specialty crops. These are crops that are processed to become more valuable, like turning tomatoes into salsa or milk into cheese. These products often bring in more money and support small or family-run farms by letting them stand out from big commercial farms. Fair trade is about making sure farmers in developing countries are paid fairly. It helps them afford better living conditions and farming tools. When you buy fair trade items like chocolate or coffee, you support more ethical farming practices. Local food movements encourage people to buy food grown nearby. This helps local farmers and reduces pollution from long-distance shipping. It also keeps money in the local economy and lets people build stronger connections with the people who grow their food. Lastly, dietary shifts are changes in what people choose to eat. More people are trying plant-based diets, eating less processed food, or cutting back on meat. These choices are often driven by health reasons, concern for animals, or the environmental impact of food production. Now let's move to the third part of this lesson, the challenges of feeding the global population. We'll talk about 4 key challenges: food insecurity and food deserts, problems with distribution, bad weather, and the loss of farmland to suburban growth. First is food insecurity and food deserts. Food insecurity means people don't always have enough food to stay healthy. A food desert is a place where there are no nearby grocery stores that sell healthy, affordable food. These problems can happen in poor countries, but also in low-income areas of wealthy countries. Next are distribution problems. Even if there is enough food in the world, some people still go hungry because the food isn't getting to them. There might be bad roads, lack of transportation, or delays at borders. Some governments may not have the resources or systems to move food where it's needed. Adverse weather is another growing problem. Climate change is making weather more extreme. Droughts, floods, and storms are destroying crops and reducing the amount of food we can grow. Farmers everywhere are struggling to adapt to these rapid changes. The last challenge is land loss to suburbanization. As cities grow outward, they cover up farmland with houses, roads, and stores. Once this land is built on, it's hard to get it back for farming. This means less space to grow food for a growing population. The fourth challenge of contemporary agriculture relates economic practices. There are 4 things we'll look at: the location of food processing facilities and markets, economies of scale, distribution systems, and government policies. First, the location of food processing facilities and markets affects where farms are set up and how food travels. If food processing facilities and markets are close to the farm, it's cheaper and faster to get the crops processed. But when these are far away, transportation takes more time and money. This is a challenge for farmers in rural, remote, and underdeveloped areas. Next is economies of scale. This means that larger farms or factories can buy supplies in bulk and use advanced machines, which lowers cost per item. This makes food cheaper, but it can also make it hard for smaller farms with less money and machines to compete. Distribution systems are another factor. This includes trucks, trains, storage centers, and shipping routes that move food from one place to another. A strong system helps food travel quickly and stay fresh. A weak system means delays and spoiled food, which hurts farmers and buyers. Finally, government policies have a big influence on food production. Governments might give money, called subsidies, to farmers who grow certain crops. They might also set rules about food safety or land use. These policies can support farming, but they can also create challenges depending on who benefits most. Okay, that's it for topic 5.11. If you're following along with the study guide, check your answers for this section, using the answer key before moving on. And when you're ready, we'll move on to topic 5.12. In this lesson, we will study the varied roles that women play in agriculture. We'll break this section down into 3 parts: women's roles in production, distribution, and consumption. Women contribute significantly to farming and food production, though this varies by region of the world and the type of agriculture. One way we can see this divide is in subsistence agriculture versus commercial agriculture, 2 terms we first came across in lesson 5.6. As a quick reminder, subsistence farming refers to growing food for yourself and your family. Commercial farming refers to growing food to sell for profit. In subsistence agriculture in regions like sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, women often plant, weed, and harvest crops for their families. Their work supports the household directly, but is often unpaid and unrecognized. In commercial agriculture, women work in plantations, greenhouses, or factory farms. However, they are often overrepresented in low-paying or seasonal jobs and have limited access to decision-making or ownership. Beyond production, women also play important roles in distributing and selling food. Firstly, they are very active in informal trade and local markets. In many cities and villages across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, women sell fresh produce, baked goods, or prepared meals in open-air markets. These markets provide income for women with few formal job opportunities. They also actively participate in supply chains and cooperatives. In some areas, women work together in farming cooperatives to share resources, improve productivity, and access broader markets. These groups give women greater bargaining power and help them connect with food distributors, especially in fair trade or organic sectors. Finally, women shape food consumption through their decisions about cooking, meal planning, and household nutrition. In many households, women decide what to buy and cook. Their choices directly affect the health of children and other family members. Okay, that brings us to the end of this section on women's role in agriculture. It's also the end of Unit 5. As usual, check your answers for this section using the study guide and answer key before moving on. And when you're ready, we'll move on to Unit 6.